One of the Bluebonnet books that I'd like to read to you is called From an Idea to Disney, How Imagination Built a World of Magic. This is by Louis Sickle and illustrated by C.S. Jennings. And I'm not sure if I pronounced the author's name correctly, but this is read with permission by the publisher as well. So I'm looking at this book. It's a biography. It looks like a pretty short one. And I like to inspect a book before I actually start reading it. And I can see that there are 11 chapters plus a timeline and some other things. So I think I'll break this up into 2 chapters each time where I read it, and you can listen to it at your leisure. And at the very end, it has a quote that I want to start with, and I'll probably end with this too, because this is a wonderful quote by Walt Disney. Whatever you do, do it well. Do it so well that when people see you do it, they will want to come back and see you do it again, and they will want to bring others and show them how well you do what you do. Anyway, I always think it's a good idea to try to do something the best you can. All right, let's get started on this one. Another quote. I only hope that we never lose sight of one thing, that it was all started by a mouse. Guess you never know what's going to be the inspiration of something great. What is the business story behind the Walt Disney Company? When you think of Disney, you probably think of Mickey Mouse. That's not surprising, considering Mickey Mouse is the best-known cartoon character in the world. You probably can also name dozens, possibly hundreds of other Disney characters. Perhaps you have been to Walt Disney World in Florida or Disneyland in California. Maybe you've watched the Disney Channel on TV, been on a Disney cruise, or seen Disney on Broadway show. Today, the Walt Disney Company is the biggest entertainment company in the world, but a long time ago, it was just an idea that 2 brothers, Walt and Roy Disney, had in 1923. This is the story of how a company that started with the idea of a cartoon mouse grew to be worth billions of dollars and employ more than 200,000 people worldwide. Chapter 1. Walt Disney's childhood. Walter Elias Disney was born on December 5th, 1901. Wow, so more than almost 120 years ago he was born. He was born in a rough neighborhood in Chicago, Illinois. When Walt was 5, the Disney family moved to a 40-acre farm in Missouri. Walt lived there with his parents, Elias and Flora Disney, and his 4 siblings. Herbert, 12 years older, Raymond, 10 years older, Roy, 8 years older, and Ruth, 2 years younger. Walt Disney had a very happy childhood and loved living on the farm. He enjoyed being surrounded by animals and nature, but also was fascinated by trains and the way they transported people to exciting new places. Most likely, Walt's fascination with trains stemmed from his Uncle Martin, who was a steam locomotive engineer and traveled between Marceline and Fort Madison, Iowa. And this says, when you're curious, you find lots of interesting things to do. Walt Disney. He has some great quotes. When you're curious, you find lots of interesting things to do. As you can imagine, Walt was a very creative and curious boy. His favorite thing to do was draw. I know some of you are really artists and love to draw as well. Often, Walt drew the animals from the farm or the trains that steamed through his hometown. Sometimes Walt drew things he wasn't supposed to, like on the side of his house with black tar on his homework. When Walt was 9, his father, Elias, became sick. Elias was not able to manage the farm anymore and decided to move his family to Kansas City. Walt was devastated. He hated to leave the farm, but Elias had no other choice. At Walt's new school, he became the class clown, often performing funny skits in front of his classmates. Walt liked to make other kids laugh by drawing silly animal cartoons on the chalkboard. When Walt was 15, his family moved again. This time they moved back to Chicago. Walt attended McKinley High School and took art classes in the evening at the Chicago Academy of Fine Arts. Walt did not like his high school, except for one thing, drawing cartoons for the school newspaper. Walt's first job. In 1919, at the age of 18, Walt moved to Kansas City looking for work. By now, Walt had also started smoking cigarettes, a dangerous habit he continued throughout his life. Walt took a job at Peaceman Rubin Commercial Art Studio, where he met Ub Iwerks, a man who would later become one of Walt's closest friends and colleagues. After only 1 month, Walt and Ub, I'm not sure how you say that, Ub, were laid off. So they decided to start their own company, Iwerks Disney Commercial Artists. Unfortunately, Iwerks Disney did not make any money and shut down shortly after it opened. Half-heartedly, Walt took a job at the Kansas City Film Ad Company, making commercials based on animation. Although he did not want to make commercials, it was there that he learned all about animation. Fascinated with his new skill, Walt decided to try to make his own animated cartoons. Walt left Kansas City Film Ad Company and started another company with Ub called Laugh-O-Gram Films. Laugh-O-Gram Films created short animated black and white cartoons that became popular in Kansas City, but did not generate enough revenue to cover Walt's expenses. Eventually, Walt ran out of money and declared bankruptcy. And in this book, you also have some definitions. Like, of course, people know laid off means fired from a job, usually because the company cannot afford to keep the person. Revenue, the amount of money a company brings in for selling its products or services, sometimes called sales, top line, or gross income. And bankruptcy, when a person or business does not have enough money to pay its debts. Chapter 2. Heading to Hollywood. During the 1920s, the only place people could watch cartoons was in movie theaters, usually just before the feature film. All cartoons in those days came in black and white and had no sound. Artists drew each panel by hand, and most cartoons were produced in Hollywood, California, the same city where movies were made. Walt thought that he had a better chance to succeed as a cartoonist if he lived and worked in Hollywood. So at the age of 22, Walt decided to move again. With only $40 in his pocket, Walt left for Hollywood, excited and optimistic. His brother Roy was already living in California, and Walt thought, I wanted Roy and I to be partners. That was all. I mean, we just wanted to be partners. I wanted it. The two brothers borrowed money from their parents, bought a new video camera, and opened the Disney Brothers Cartoon Studio in Hollywood in 1923. And another quote, all our dreams can come true if we have the courage to pursue them. Another good one. Together, Walt and Roy were a good team. Walt drew the cartoons while Roy managed the business. Early on, Walt and Roy met with a film distributor named Margaret Winkler. She presented them with a contract stating that she would pay the Disney Brother Cartoon Studio for 12 films, $1,500 each for the first 6 films, and $1,800 for each of the next 6 films. In addition, Margaret Winkler would receive the intellectual property rights to everything the Disney Brother Cartoon Studios created. The intellectual property rights ownership is ownership of a creative work or invention. Although it wasn't a great deal, it was work, and Walt signed the contract. Soon thereafter, Walt and Roy Disney hired 2 women to help with the increased workload. Walt would draw the outlines of the cartoon characters, and the 2 women would fill in or ink them. Walt fell in love with one of these women, Lillian Bounds. On July 13, 1925, Walt and Lillian got married. In 1926, the Disney Brothers Cartoon Studio changed its name. And here you can see illustrations. Changed its name to Walt Disney Studio to reflect Walt's talent and vision. Oswald the Lucky Rabbit. Walt Disney Studios had some success early on with one of their cartoon characters named Oswald the Lucky Rabbit. Meanwhile, Margaret Winkler married a man named Charles Mintz, who took over her business. Charles Mintz, however, had a sneaky plan up his sleeve. He wanted to get rid of Walt and Roy and take over Walt Disney Studios. Charles approached Walt with a second contract. It stated that Walt Disney Studios would produce 26 animated short cartoons featuring Oswald the Lucky Rabbit, but Charles Mintz would pay them only $1,500 for each film. This was even less money than the first contract, and again gave Charles Mintz the intellectual property rights to everything that Walt Disney Studios created. But Walt needed the work, so he signed the contract, and he hired several more artists and animators, including Walt's good friend Ub Iwerks. And let's see, agreement. Give up the Lucky Rabbit to Charles Mintz, and he signed it. Fun facts. In 2006, the Walt Disney Company bought the rights to Oswald the Lucky Rabbit from NBC Universal. Soon afterwards, Oswald made a camera appearance in the movie Big Hero 6 and Zootopia. With the new films, Oswald the Lucky Rabbit became very popular among children and adults. However, Charles Mintz's plan to take over Walt Disney Studios soon went into effect. First, Charles signed a new 3-year agreement with Universal Studios to create more Oswald the Lucky Rabbit cartoons. Then, without Walt and Roy knowing, Charles approached the artists and animators at Walt Disney Studio and hired them away, all of them except for Ub Iwerks. Charles Mintz now owned Oswald the Lucky Rabbit, and he employed most of Walt's employees. Walt was furious. He and Lillian took a train ride to New York City to try to negotiate a new deal, but Charles Mintz only offered Walt even less money and now wanted full control of Walt Disney Studios. Walt refused the deal and he walked away. An idea. Angry and frustrated, Walt and Lillian Disney headed back home on a train from Manhattan to Hollywood. It was then that an idea popped into Walt's head. Walt's idea was a cartoon mouse. Walt quickly sketched the mouse on a pad of paper. The mouse had round black ears, a white face, a big smile, and a long tail. Walt showed it to Lillian and announced the mouse's name, Mortimer Mouse. Did you know that? Mortimer Mouse. Lillian questioned. She did not like the sound of the name, Mortimer. Several days later, Lillian suggested a different name. Lillian Disney suggested Mickey Mouse. Fun fact. In 1978, Mickey Mouse became the first animated character to have a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. That's pretty funny. All right. So I've read just the first 2 chapters. If you enjoyed this, I hope you continue reading or listening.